We have found a little bit that we like to babysit, meaning here's our technology, here's how it works, we're explaining to people. And the reality is, just like any app or anything else, it eventually has to sit in somebody's home, sit in somebody's car, sit in somebody's building or business and work and impact their clients and their business or perhaps their employees. And so what I've really tried to do is to make sure that feedback is quite direct. We needed to have something that was pretty substantial, something that's a little more physical, because we literally are talking about people picking up their trash and putting it in some place. And an app is a little bit abstract and doesn't necessarily push you as to do the right thing every time. The idea is to make sure that sustainability is not just for the climate. It's not just for the community, it also has a financial return. There are some people in the sustainability industry that talk about return on imagination, and that's fantastic. I love that idea, but I also think that you need to literally send a spreadsheet out to your customer, and then it helps them to think, the guy who I'm working with over there, he's actually trying to help me to sell this to my leadership and management. He's trying to make my job easier.
Thomas, thank you very much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what it is you're currently focused on?
Hi, yeah. So Tom Grinnan here. I'm the CEO of Data Company One. We go by DC1 out of Richmond, Virginia. I was recently nominated to be CEO, so I'm taking on a lot of new tasks. We'll get into that on the call. My background is really in international business development, sales, and marketing. Most of my career was spent in the packaging business, particularly focused on the pharmaceutical and medical device sector. And I had two particular stints overseas where I was in London for 3 years and then in Paris, but have been going back and forth to Europe in particular in order to see clients or work directly with manufacturing and technology businesses for the past 20 years. Data Company One, where I'm presently seated, is a company that's focused on sustainability. We leverage AI and software technology in order to drive down waste. We're focused on a particular challenge that's called landfill diversion, which is basically trying to utilize systems in order to reduce the amount of volume, the kilograms that go into a landfill, and put them more into a recycling stream or perhaps something like a composting stream. And we help to create purer waste streams around those particular products by utilizing AI and technology on the front end directly with customers. Yeah, focused on building the business and certainly learning my new role. There've been some surprises, but it's been a lot of fun thus far.
I think there always is surprises with that kind of thing. Now you're transitioning into that CEO role. Obviously that comes with a lot more broader strategic stuff as opposed to the business development from the CCO. So how are you balancing that need to get immediate results with the new role while also setting the long-term vision for the company?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to have a pretty long career, always working with technology companies, but working with larger companies that did a lot of training, did a lot of work on prioritization, management skills, et cetera. So right now, my major goal is to prioritize correctly because we have a small team, we have a lot to do. We have some customers that are asking us to stretch our capabilities in order to meet milestones. And so I'm really focused on the customer and what they're trying to accomplish, bringing on some new customers, but particularly focused on these existing customers and opportunities, and then relaying them back to our technical internal team to make sure that we meet their needs. Fortunately, we're not sitting at a chasm of capability in terms of the difference between what they want and what we can provide, but we are being really refined in how we're updating our product, some updates that we're doing on the customer side, how we present ourselves. But I'm super focused on, still, I was the chief commercial officer before taking on the role of CEO, super focused on customer acquisition and traction. But I've added in spending a lot of time with the development team. And I'm just trying to make sure that given that we're a small company, every single thing that we do is focused on the customer rather than perhaps on some sort of new idea. Those are fantastic, by the way. We love that. We have to have that innovation, that spark, but we're really trying to make sure that we refine what we do in order to meet customer needs so that we in turn can ensure that traction and help to ensure the life of the company going forward.
That interests me a bit because what I find at a lot of software companies is there almost tends to be cycles where there'll be a period of sort of listening to customers to help develop the product. And then there's usually a year or 2 years lag for the marketing and sales side of things, where that messaging and what clients currently want isn't being fed back through. Are you doing anything to fight that yourself? Are you having regular meetings with the marketing and sales team and saying, this is what clients are asking for? Does the rest of the market want this?
Fortunately, we're a small enough team, we're less than 10 people. So don't necessarily have a marketing department sitting in New York or London that I need to get on the phone. I can literally sit down with our people pretty quickly. But what I've really tried to do is to make sure that even our head of development, our top technical person, he has been coming to the customer meetings and events. And so we're really fortunate when we work with a customer. We often will do a week-long, day-long, sometimes even a night-long deployment of our technology, and we get a ton of feedback from that. And we really go back to the customer and ask them, hey, what happened? What did you see? We also leave our product directly with that customer without us, because we have found a little bit that we like to babysit, meaning here's our technology, here's how it works, we're explaining to people. And the reality is, just like any app or anything else, it eventually has to sit in somebody's home, sit in somebody's car, sit in somebody's building or business and work and impact their clients and their business or perhaps their employees. And so what I've really tried to do is to make sure that feedback is quite direct. And I've also put timelines on that where we're not looking at doing things over a month. We literally are saying we need to kind of fix this particular issue over the next 2 weeks. I'll give you one just quick example. It's a fantastic system. You can walk up to it and it'll identify the Coke can in your hand as an aluminum can. It'll tell you how many grams of aluminum are in that. It'll then tell you which bin to put it in. So if you have a set of bins in front of you, perhaps recycling, metal, paper, etc. You can do that with a barcode scanner as well. You can scan the barcode and it'll identify that actual item from a very, very quick AI internet search. And so it knows it from there. But the long and short of it is, there can be a lag at times when it's looking up that information. And we were trying to figure out why. So we've figured out kind of why that lag was occurring. And sometimes when we went back and looked at the logs, for example, it knew very closely what it was, but our confidence intervals were so high, 95% plus, for example, that it was kind of hesitating and say, I think it's a can, I'm not quite sure. And so what I've gone back and has just said, hey, the feedback from the customer, you heard it, is they don't like this spinning, even if it's just a few seconds. If we think we have a good idea of what it is, we need to let the customer know that we're either thinking about it and show them something like a spinning wheel or something that shows them we're thinking, or we need to tell them what it is. And so that's for us, that's called unknowns, is that whole kind of field. And so I've really worked not just to try to improve the AI, because AI is always being improved, software is always being improved, and really focus on, hey, let's just go do this one little thing where we try to address this particular issue, which has both UI and AI kind of back office processing issues associated with it. And so we've kind of done that, and we've literally tackled that within a few days. And that's really exciting, because it means that I can get back to the customer and say, hey, remember that issue? Remember that feedback that you gave us from the deployment that we had when we were out for a couple of days in your office building? Let me show you a video as to what's happening today. Sorry, hopefully I didn't go on a tangent there, but I wanted to let you know how I try to look at these things. I really try and make sure that we work as a team, and that I give that direct customer feedback if I possibly can, and so that there's no hesitation or translation challenge.
I'm curious. So now you're stepping into this new role as CEO. Are there any leaders, other CEOs, past experiences that are almost inspiring the way that you approach that role?
Yeah, there are a few people I was thinking of. There are three people who are perhaps not well known to the general world, but were very impactful for me. A guy named Ted Sasso, Bruce Thomas, a guy named Jim Buzzard. And these were kind of Richmond leaders that worked with me in the pharmaceutical, packaging and an area of the business that I worked in, a company called Midwest Vaco. And the challenge that we had was to try to fix patient adherence, which is basically how people take their medications, whether they take it at the correct time, at the correct dosing. And this was a totally new business for a packaging company. You can imagine packaging companies kind of popping products out left and right, and listening to what Procter & Gamble or GSK or Pfizer want, and simply providing it. And this was no, we're actually going to try and tackle a patient issue. We're trying to solve our customers' issue. And they had the vision, but they also were very, very good just within your blocking and tackling in terms of fiscal and operational excellence, and then had really good kind of strategic and customer acquisition advice, but they were all focused on mentoring. And so that's kind of what I try to think about on a day-to-day basis is my interaction with leaders like that through the year. And I try to be a sounding board both for my particular network and contact base. I'm a member of a couple of business organizations. There's a great small business organization here in my city in Richmond that's super technology and software driven. So I try very, very hard to both seek advice and use my peers as a soundboard, but also to serve that role. And then it's maybe some other people that I have always kind of studied and admired, which maybe are known a little bit more broadly, and I don't know them personally or didn't. One would be Steve Jobs. The other would be a guy named Clayton Christensen, who really was one of the leaders in teaching business about disruptive technology and disruptive systems. Fantastic books that he has written through the years. I don't know if he's still with Harvard, but I spent a fair amount of my kind of mid-career trying to make sure that I was setting up businesses that matched that and was doing the analysis and thinking about how Uber takes on taxis in a city and that whole intransient system and really kind of breaks that apart. Those are the businesses I want to be involved in. And then a guy named Eric Ries, R-A-S, who wrote a book called The Lean Startup that I've actually been rereading recently, particularly since I took on this role. I picked it up again over Christmas, just because it's a fantastic, fairly compact. There's some stuff you can do on the web, but I really enjoyed those three kind of business leaders who tried to teach the industry and the world about technology. And two of them are obviously still hard at work at that. I took a lot of lessons away from them in terms of some of the things that I need to be thinking about, not just what I can see in front of me, but perhaps what's sitting around the corner and be working on those things, because everything changes so quickly in the industry and the world today that if you're not really thinking ahead and you haven't established that flexibility in organization, you may end up behind.
I think having an adaptable organization is really important, especially there comes a time when it professionalizes and it becomes a lot more, I guess, behemoth-like. There becomes more bureaucracy and things like that. But before that point, being adaptable and being able to pivot is really important. I'm interested to know, as the company's grown, and obviously you were in the CCO role before, every company faces growth challenges. I wonder what the biggest hurdles Data Company One has faced in your growth and how you're addressing it in this new role.
For us, it was really one, trying to make sure that we did a really good job of finding the right customer profile, or developing the right profile and finding the right customer that fit that, I should say. But really developing that profile in a very comprehensive way ended up being really, really critical for my CCO role, but also kind of putting us where we are today. So yeah, our growth challenges are really in getting higher revenue traction and customers on board, and making sure that when we utilize our scarce resources in terms of sales outreach, marketing, et cetera, even product development, that it's focused on customer requirements that are really going to drive revenue and traction. Those are the real challenges. How that kind of played out a little bit for me is when I started with the company in March, late March, early April of 2024, we were really a software company trying to push an app. And the app itself was decent, but had some limitations. And what became clear to me right off the bat is that in order to change a behavior, we needed to have something that was pretty substantial in terms of something interacting with the client or the customer, something that's a little more physical, because we literally are talking about people picking up their trash and putting it in some place. And an app is a little bit abstract and doesn't necessarily push you to do the right thing every time, unless you build a lot of capability into it and you're familiar with some of the gamification that certain apps use, as well as the way they utilize, social networking in order to keep people striving and perhaps connecting with others. But the long and short of it is that the challenge then was, what is that other thing that's going to be physical? And we ended up developing a product really that was available in late June and July called Green Scanner Station, that was a smart recycling station. So my real challenge is making sure that new product is understood, is sold correctly, has the right capability in order to get that customer traction. And we think from a revenue perspective that particular product also will position us much, much better to have more steady growth. There's a way to utilize and sell the app on the back of that much easier, as opposed to the other way around. And so we've really made that our lead product. So I've had to change our marketing as well as how we present ourselves to have that be front and center. And also it allowed us to do events so much more effectively. We've done a fairly decent size football or professional soccer game here in the States. We've been to one of the largest theme parks, which is called Busch Gardens, and done a very, very big event there. We've done concerts. We've done a very big basketball game, and we've done some corporate things where we've been on site at, very, very big corporate headquarters when everyone's rushing around trying to eat their lunch. And yet that company, for example, one of the companies was a lead company. So the long and short of it is having a physical product, a smart recycling station in all those events is very media friendly. It also provides the real value that they can kind of see. Okay, so they really have something here. They're not trying to sell me a bunch of technology. I can see what this thing is really doing. And so to pivot and move us into more of this software platform plus kind of durable good technology has really helped move us in the right direction. But the challenge is making sure that we very quickly consummate that particular change and have that enveloped in our business and our value proposition. It's been successful. It's been exciting, but that's certainly been one of my big challenges. I think there are also always financial constraints in terms of me taking over and trying to make sure that we're spending money on the right things, that we have the right people on the bus, as they say. That looking at our HR and our team. Do we have the right people here that really kind of help us to move forward? We can't quite afford to maybe have somebody who's halfway in or is not quite delivering on what we need done. And then also to make sure that I'm reaching out to the investment community. Now, that's just happening because it's been pretty recent, but obviously, I'm interested in funding our next level of growth. We certainly have revenue coming in, but I would like to make some more investments in the business, mainly on the human resource side and in terms of adding to our team to help us to grow, and then a few marketing things. So I'll be reaching out to the investment community going forward.
One thing I do want to mention is having that physical product helps because there's something actually tangible there for people to see and to use. And I think that always helps. That's one of the downsides of having a software company is it's quite intangible. So other than screenshots of the actual software, there's not really much to go on. I find the new product quite interesting. So you already had a market and a customer profile. And how was it you went about researching what the right products would be for them to make sure you have that product market fit?
We just got a new president in who may change some things about how we work here in these great 50 United States. At the end of the day, sustainability is a real core business issue. If you look at how China has conducted itself in terms of trying to improve the climate within its own country, it's developed a whole EV industry that basically is taking combustion engines off the road, period. So for us, it was finding clients who really wanted to focus on sustainability, meaning if a client had no sustainability officer, didn't have any mention within their annual reports or any local news that they were interested in sustainability, and then the likelihood of them wanting to invest in a recycling system that is smart and has a lot of technology is just not really, really high. And so for me, it was really about trying to develop that profile, which had about 15 different points to it and helped us to really target things. One of our big client bases is the university space. And in the States, university presidents actually are quite powerful. It's a very important position because they run massive endowments. I forget what Harvard's endowment is, 60 billion or something like that. So these are really CEOs. And so when you can find a university that has literally talked about sustainability at the president address level, you know they're on the right track. When you can track, for example, have they developed some goals around sustainability, or maybe it's a corporation, have they made a statement to the financial industry and to Wall Street that we are going to reduce our waste by X or our energy by Y, then you can really kind of hone in. So for me, the research was really in making sure that I thought through what were the characteristics of that customer, how large, where should they be located, but then also maybe some of these slightly softer issues where a very effective AI search can help you. Has the president spoken on sustainability? Is there any interest? Are there some clear objectives that they've established around sustainability, particularly around waste reduction or recycling? And then that made our pool a little bit smaller when we went after it. The second thing is there are a couple of trade associations as well that are super focused on our industry. So we were lucky enough to join an organization and frankly get quite a bit out of an organization called the Green Sports Alliance, which again sounds like a fairly prosaic type of corporate group, but it's really where a lot of professional sports and amateur sports meet to work on sustainability. certainly heavily in North America, but increasingly global. And so there are very few organizations that could get me introduced to an NBA team or an NFL football team or the athletic department for one of the largest universities in the Southeast or the Northeast or the central US. But these are the people who show up there. So that was really, really interesting too, because then from a profile perspective, there's no way that they would be wasting their time with this organization if there wasn't some sort of interest from them already. And so attending those conferences, attending those webcasts, and really going back to the board of that organization and interviewing them as to, hey, can you provide some feedback on our business plan, on what we're trying to do on the space? That's been super helpful. So those are probably the two major, I mean, lots of other tools, LinkedIn, et cetera, that we use, social media, but that was really helpful to take the time to develop the profile, find those particular companies, but then also this trade association that allowed us to all of a sudden grow our pool. And we found that we were making the right decisions because lo and behold, a lot of the organizations we were targeting were already in that organization. So we knew that prior to knowing them well, maybe we're on the right track.
Data Company One, or Greenscanner, now focuses on landfill diversion and carbon avoidance. How is it that you show businesses and their stakeholders the return on investment of those? Do you even sell on return on investment? Is it something else that you educate them on first?
That's a great question, and certainly a piece of advice that I'd give somebody else going forward too, is to look at ROI. The idea is to make sure that sustainability is not just for the climate. It's not just for the community. It also, has a financial return. There are some people in the sustainability industry that talk about return on imagination or return on innovation. And that's fantastic. I love that idea, but I also think that you need to literally spend a spreadsheet out to your customer every now and then, which we did last week and the week before. We have a very particular model that I developed that really hits into, two different pieces for us. One is the ability of our system to provide a brand activation, basically advertising and partnership space for perhaps people who want to advertise or associate with that organization. So let's just say that's a sports team, or maybe it's university, maybe it's Coca-Cola or a major bank, Microsoft or something like that, who wants to have a sustainability profile with that particular client of ours. Then advertising would help to pay for the system and help to pay for our piece. But we actually have done a lot of work thinking about the costs of waste. And really, there are two major costs if you look on the average contract, say for maybe a venue, and this might be a stadium. It also might be a building, a corporate building, office. They normally have a waste contract that includes recycling, and they have one that includes what's called landfill or solid waste. And so those overall solid waste contracts have a component that has a different price. And believe it or not, recycling is normally cheaper because when you pick up the recycling, if you're a waste company, you can sell part of it. You get some of it back. If it goes in a landfill, unless you own the landfill, you're paying somebody to actually landfill it. The idea here is that you actually pay less. When you recycle more for your building or venue, you pay less. And so I put that back into the ROI. And some of these organizations that are perhaps 7 days a week because they're being utilized, or maybe it's a full-time public facility of some sort, the amount of pickups that they have is substantial. Normally it's once a week, by the way, but they might have 6 or 7 or 8 different very, very, very large bins, what they call dumpsters over here, where they pick up from. Well, the difference between picking up bin recycling and picking up one when you have landfill is 35% or plus. And so imagine you're moving volume into that more expensive service, into that less expensive service by recycling more, then that provides an ROI. And we can prove that our system is driving that, creating pure waste streams and helping to reduce landfills. But again, the advertising piece is super important, and that's really, really exciting. And the way that you can leverage technology in order to partner with a brand, you could put videos on it. And then this other piece around reducing the amount that goes to landfill and lowering that cost. Those are two major components of our ROI. But there are lots of ROIs in sustainability. I have a client who explained to me how just installing LED bulbs throughout that campus made a massive difference for him. And so I took that to heart and really tried to pick his brain on how do you put that together? How do you justify that? What type of return? Are you looking for a 3-year return or less in terms of payback? What type of ROI? So I put together Excel models that literally do that so that I make assumptions and I say, hey, I've left these cells open. If I didn't get the right number because I don't know exactly what you're paying for your waste, but this is the average in your region, please correct that. And then it helps them to think about like, well, that guy who I'm working with over there, he's actually trying to help me to sell this to my leadership and management. He's trying to make my job easier. I actually really appreciate that as much as the technology.
Return on imagination is a nice term, but I'm not sure that's going to sell many stakeholders or shareholders. I really like that idea of what you've just mentioned then with the Excel sheet. Like, a lot of sustainability companies will have, say, a champion in a prospect company that really wants to go with their service, but if they can't sell that to their executive team, they're just not going to get the budget for it. So that's a really interesting way of doing it, and it's the first time I've heard that where yes, you can create one-page business plans and you can work with them to create those business cases, but giving them a tool to actually show their leadership team how much it can help, really great idea. Obviously, this transition to CEO is a big step. What's been the biggest leadership lesson you've learned so far in your career, especially with balancing strategy and execution?
For me, it's really the thing that I probably wasn't doing as much before is keeping track of, all of our financial accounts and the cash flow and all that. So yeah, I mean, definitely, as you step into that role, make sure that you immediately meet with your CFO, meet with your accountants, really understand kind of where the money, how it's working and how you can have an impact. Because the reality is previous CEO did a great job, but perhaps there are a few things that he prioritized that I don't believe are as important going forward. So me trying to grow the business and keeping it lean, again, per the lean startup, that I'm a big fan of, was definitely a key piece. So the first thing I would say, watch the money in the accounts and really dive into that and make sure that you are highly engaged in that process. Because it's really a few hours and then you kind of got it. But then what are those steps that you take? Hey, do we need this, and this that are costing us this per month? So as a smaller company, I would say that's really important. It's great to keep everybody motivated and work on the sales with the clients, but get that financial grounding really, really quickly. And then also to really keep equal pressure on development and sales. I think I already described to you a little bit about how I try to make sure that those customer needs are translated directly back to our technical team, but trying to make sure that they are continually allocating some time to come with us on the customer calls or attend these deployments that we have. I've made that perhaps maybe a slightly larger priority than it was before. But I also think that when they hear from a customer, to some degree, it's a directive. They totally get it. They're like, if this customer asked for this, so I'm a problem solver. If I can go solve this, then I can help to get the sale done for the company. I like giving that responsibility. I think but those are the two things for me that have kind of switched a little bit is the money, and then also how I've tried to really equally push sales and development at the same pace and at the same time.
My final question for you, Thomas, is if you had one piece of advice for another sustainability company, what would it be?
I would say this. I mean, first off, figure out your value proposition and your ROI can come from there. So for me, I would say the biggest piece of advice I would have is don't be afraid. If you take the time to develop a value proposition, make sure that it has a component to it that really does bring value to your customer, perhaps even in a financial way. Because if it's so broad that it doesn't get into that at all, you may have difficulty getting into an ROI, and maybe you haven't thought through all the pieces of exactly what your system does, or maybe you don't have the right customer or the right market yet. So for me, it's this process of going from a really well-constructed value proposition into how that might financially impact or how you can develop that ROI. And again, that ROI could come from some really interesting places. It could come from things like grants in terms of revenue generation. It could come from advertising on your system. If you have a system that is making the planet a bit safer, a bit greener, that's fantastic. But my advice would be to make sure that you're thinking about the longevity of your business in that overall process. And that means, going from value proposition to ROI. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Thomas. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.